Welcome to Exposed Cheaters by New Tales. If this is your first time visiting this channel, or you've already subscribed, you are welcome. Here, you will discover gripping cheating stories, infidelity stories, marriage betrayal, relationship drama, shocking confessions, unfaithful spouses, hidden secrets, cheaters exposed, and consequences that nobody saw coming. Every story is designed to take you through deception, suspicion, betrayal, discovery, and the moment when the truth finally comes out. If you enjoy Reddit-style cheating stories, relationship betrayal stories, marriage drama, and shocking twists, you are in the right place. Subscribe to Exposed Cheaters by New Tales and turn on notifications. The truth may stay hidden for a while, but eventually, every cheater gets exposed. Your time, trust, and your comments keep this community alive. As you listen, share your thoughts, feelings, and lessons below, so we can learn together. Settle in. The truth and the twist are coming. Let's get into it. The candles had burned down to stubs by the time Julian Reyes walked back into my life, and I didn't recognize the version of myself that lit up when he did. 12 of us were crammed around Priya's dining table, wine glasses sweating rings into wood. And when the door opened and he stepped in shaking rain off his jacket, I felt something shift in my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Daniel, my husband of 6 years, was 3 seats down. He didn't say anything. He just went very still. The way he does before a storm he can already smell. Before you keep watching, subscribe now, because what her husband pulls out of that bag in the next 5 minutes will make you rewatch this whole video. Hit subscribe so you don't miss part 2. Julian had been my colleague almost something. The boy I wrote bad poetry about and never told anyone. Seeing him now, silver at the temples, still doing that thing where he tilts his head before he laughs. It was like finding an old song and realizing you still know every word. He hugged me too long. He said my name like it meant something. Across the table, Daniel refilled his water glass. Just water. He'd stopped drinking an hour before, which I noticed and filed away without thinking about why. Dinner moved the way dinners do. Too much talk, too little food, everyone louder than the last course required. Julian sat 2 seats from me, and somehow the whole table bent around him, the way rooms do around people who decided to be interesting. He told a story about sailing off the coast of Croatia. He told another about a gallery opening where a sculpture had actually come alive, or so he swore, gestured with both hands like he was conducting something invisible. I laughed at all of it. I laughed harder than the jokes deserved. Somewhere around the second bottle, Julian put his hand on my forearm to make a point about nothing important and left it there a beat too long. I didn't move it. I told myself it was nothing. The kind of nothing that happens between old friends who used to matter to each other. But I felt Daniel's eyes on it. Not on Julian's face, not on mine, on the hand. When I finally looked up, my husband was smiling at something someone else had said, and the smile didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. "You're quiet tonight," Priya said to him, refilling his water without asking. "I'm listening," Daniel said, which was true and also not an answer. I should have left it there. I didn't. Something reckless in me. 3 glasses of Malbec and old ghosts. Wanted to poke at the quiet. Wanted to see what was underneath it. "He's fine," I said, loud enough at the table. He gets like this. Territorial. A few people laugh, the uncomfortable kind. Daniel's jaw did the thing it does. I kept going anyway, because apparently that night I was someone who kept going. Daniel doesn't love parties where I actually enjoy myself. I said like it was funny, like it was affectionate, like I wasn't drawing a line down the center of the table with a steak knife. Julian laughed too loud, delighted to have a role in the drama. It's cute, honestly. Jealous husband syndrome. Very caveman. Priya's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. Daniel didn't look up from his glass. He turned it slowly, watching the water settle, like he was deciding something that had nothing to do with me. "Careful," said Rosa from the far end, not unkindly. "Jealousy's not always the ugly thing people make it out to be. It is when it's about nothing," I said, and reached over and squeezed Julian's arm to prove a point I couldn't have named if pressed. Julian grinned like he'd won an argument he hadn't been part of. Daniel finally looked up. Not at Julian. At me. There was something in his face I didn't have a name for yet. Not anger. Not hurt exactly. Something colder and more patient than either. He set his glass down without a sound. "Can I say something?" he asked the table. and his voice was so level that conversations around us actually stopped mid-sentence, the way rooms sometimes do when they sense a shift in air pressure before the storm arrives. If you've ever misjudged someone you loved, smash that like button right now. And comment, tell her, if you think Daniel already knew the truth. I'll pin the best comments before the reveal. Everyone turned. Julian leaned back, amused, like he was about to watch a man make a fool of himself over a woman he could no longer keep. I remember thinking, don't. I remember wanting to reach for his hand under the table and call the whole thing off, whatever it was about to be. But some part of me, the reckless, wine-warm part, also wanted to see it. Wanted to know what he'd finally say after years of quiet. Julian, Daniel said, and something in the way he said the name made my stomach drop before I understood why. It's been a long time. 19 years, I think, since Ohio. The table went very quiet. Julian's smile faltered. Just barely, just enough. I'm sorry, he said. Have we met? You went by a different last name then, Daniel said, still perfectly calm, reaching into the leather bag he'd brought and never opened all evening. Julian Mercer. You dated my sister for 8 months her senior year. He set the bag on his lap, but didn't open it yet. You told her you were starting a hedge fund. You borrowed $40,000 from her college fund to, quote, cover a bridge loan. Then you disappeared. She was 20. She never finished her degree. I felt the floor of the evening tilt. I looked at Julian, and for the first time all night, he wasn't performing anything. His face had gone carefully blank, the specific blankness of a man recalculating. I don't know what you're talking about, Julian said, but his voice had lost its music. I didn't recognize you either at first, Daniel said. Not until you did the thing with your hands. The gallery story. You told my sister almost that exact story, word for word, the week before she gave you the check. He finally opened the bag. Inside was a folder, thin, unassuming, the kind of object that shouldn't have been able to silence a room the way it did the moment it hit the table. I've spent the last 4 months making calls, he said, sliding the folder toward Priya, not toward me, not toward Julian, verifying it wasn't just an old grudge talking. It wasn't hard once I knew what to look for. 3 names since Ohio, 3 different women, 3 different cities, always the same pattern. New circle, financial trouble revealed slowly, a loan that becomes a gift that becomes a disappearance. My mouth had gone dry. I thought about his stillness earlier, the water instead of wine, the way he hadn't looked at Julian's hand on my arm but had clocked it anyway. I thought I'd been watching with jealousy. I hadn't been watching jealousy at all. I'd been watching a man do math in his head, quietly, for months, while I called him territorial in front of people we both loved. This is insane, Julian said, standing now, color coming back into his face in the wrong way, the flush of a man cornered rather than embarrassed. You're going to believe this ambush, over. I have bank records, Daniel said, not raising his voice at all, which somehow made it worse. I have my sister's statement. I have 2 other women who agreed to talk to me once they realized they weren't the only ones. One of them recognized your photo from Priya's engagement post 6 weeks ago. That's when I started looking. He looked at Priya then, and something soft and apologetic crossed his face. I'm sorry I didn't say something sooner. I want to be sure before I said it in front of everyone you love. Priya's hands were shaking as she opened the folder. Nobody at the table breathed. I watched her scan the first page, then the second, her face draining of color the way faces do when a fear they've been keeping small suddenly grows teeth. This is my building, she said quietly. This address. He told me he was renting it for a client. She looked up at Julian like she was seeing a stranger wearing a familiar coat. You asked me last week for access to my investment account. For due diligence, you said. The table erupted at once, a dozen conversations colliding. Rosa demanding to see the folder. Someone else asking Julian to explain himself. Julian talking louder and faster than any of them, his charm curdling into something desperate and thin. I sat frozen at the center of it. The woman who'd laughed loudest all night, who'd called her husband a jealous caveman for reading a room correctly. I felt sick, not because I'd been wrong about Julian, because I've been so sure I understood what jealousy looked like on my husband's face. You knew, I said to Daniel, my voice small under the noise. Tonight, you knew before we even sat down. I've known for 3 weeks, he said. And for the first time his composure cracked slightly, not into anger but into something more tired. I didn't know how to bring it up, without it sounding like I was trying to control who you talk to. I know how that looks from the outside. I've watched people do that to their partners. Dress up control as concern. I didn't want to be that. So I waited. I built the case instead of raising my voice. I thought that was a responsible way to do it. And instead I stood up here and called it caveman behavior. I said, and the words tasted like ash. Julian was still talking, still trying to spin the documents into misunderstanding. But Priya had already stepped back from him like he was something that might catch fire. Rosa was on her phone. Someone else was quietly, deliberately, blocking the front door with their body. Not aggressively, just present, the way people do when they've decided something without needing to announce it. I wasn't jealous of him talking to you, Daniel said, quiet enough that it felt like it was only for me, even with the chaos around us. I was afraid of what I already knew and couldn't prove yet. There's a difference. Jealousy wants to own something. I just didn't want you to be the 4th name on a list I was building in a folder in my car for a month. He said it without cruelty, which somehow made it land harder than cruelty would have. Julian tried once more, appealing to the table, to old friendship, to the absurdity of the accusation. And it was Rosa, of all people, who cut him off. I looked you up while you were talking, she said, turning her phone around. A woman's face filled the screen, a name that wasn't Julian Reyes or Julian Mercer, a warning post in a private group for women who'd been burned the same way, dated 8 months earlier, from a city 3 states away. The room's temper shifted from disbelief to something harder and more certain. That's not me, Julian said, but nobody was listening anymore. The performance had run out of audience. He looked, for just a second, like a much smaller man than the one who'd walked in shaking rain off his shoulders an hour before. Priya asked him, very quietly, very evenly, to leave. He looked around the table for an ally and found none, not even me, especially not me, sitting there with my face burning from more than the wine. He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him with none of the drama his entrance had carried. For a moment nobody spoke. Someone finally exhaled, long and shaky, and the sound seemed to give everyone else permission to breathe too. Priya sat down hard, the folder still open in front of her, and Rosa put a hand on her shoulder without saying anything, because there wasn't really anything to say yet that wouldn't sound small next to what had almost happened to her. I turned to Daniel. I wanted to apologize in front of everyone, the way I'd humiliated him in front of everyone, but he shook his head slightly, just for me, a small motion that said not here, not like this. So I sat with it instead, the shame settling into my stomach like a stone, while the table slowly reassembled itself around a new, quieter subject. What to do next, whether to call police, whether Priya's account was actually safe, whether any of them had unknowingly vouched for him to someone else. Rosa called a detective friend before dessert was even cleared, and within 20 minutes there was a name for what Julian had been doing across 3 states, a pattern serious enough that it had its own file number somewhere already, waiting for someone to finally connect the dots. Daniel had spent a month connecting alone in his car outside a bank, on his lunch breaks, in the quiet hour after I'd gone to bed. I hadn't noticed him leaving the house those nights. I'd been too busy, I realized, noticing other things. Priya wanted to know how Daniel had known to even look. He explained it plainly, without performance, the way he explains everything. That something about Julian's laugh at the engagement party had snagged his memory, familiar in a way he couldn't place at first, and it had taken him 2 days to realize where he'd heard it. He hadn't wanted to be wrong. He hadn't wanted to accuse a stranger of ruining his sister's life on a hunch. So he'd waited and checked, and waited again. You could have told me, I said later, once most people had gone. Once it was just us and Priya, and the wreckage of a dinner none of us would forget. Any of it. All of it. Instead, I spent the whole night thinking you were sulking, because a good-looking man was flirting with your wife. I know how that sounds from where you were sitting, he said. I'm not going to pretend it doesn't sting. Hearing you tell a table full of people I was jealous, when I was trying to protect someone I love from a man who'd already hurt someone else I love. But I also understand why you read it that way. I wasn't exactly transparent. I thought silence was kinder than suspicion I couldn't yet prove. It wasn't kinder, I said. It just felt like I was the only one who didn't know what was happening in my own house. He didn't argue with that. He let it sit, the way he lets things sit when he knows arguing would just be another way of not listening. Priya excused herself to check on something in the kitchen that didn't need checking, giving us the kind of privacy only a good friend knows how to manufacture out of nothing. The house had gone quiet in a particular way houses do after they've held something enormous. No music, no laughter, just a tick of radiator and two people finally facing each other honestly. I called you a caveman, I said, in front of everyone, because you were quiet, and I decided quiet meant jealousy, meant small, meant something to be embarrassed about instead of something to be curious about. My voice cracked on the last word, and I let it. I've spent the whole night thinking I know exactly what you look like when you're upset. I don't know what you look like when you're protecting someone with everything you've got and not making a single sound about it. I should have told you sooner, Daniel said. I kept telling myself I was waiting for proof, and that was true, but it was also easy in the conversation where I admit I recognize a name from my sister's worst year, and I'm scared, and I don't know how to say that without sounding like I'm trying to run your friendships. I didn't want to be the husband who gets to decide who you're allowed to enjoy talking to, so I said nothing instead, and that turned out to be its own kind of mistake. We sat with that for a while, not fixing it exactly, just letting it exist between us, without either of us trying to smooth it over too fast, because some things don't deserve a fast smoothing. I thought about the water glass he kept refilling all night, while everyone else got looser and louder. I thought about how I'd read restrain his resentment, when really it had been a man trying, badly and quietly and out of love, to carry something heavy without dropping on the person he was trying to protect. Priya's sister called 2 days later. Julian, or whatever his real name turned out to be, because there were at least 2 on record by then, had been picked up trying to open a new account in a fourth city. The pattern finally catching up with the way patterns eventually do when enough people start comparing notes. Rose's detective friend said Daniel's folder had made the case move in weeks instead of the usual months. Priya changed every password she owned that night and cried in her kitchen, and I sat with her, and neither of us said much, because sometimes the sitting is the thing. I thought a lot, those first days, about the difference between the story I told at the table and the true one sitting underneath it. I'd narrated Daniel as jealous because that story was easy, familiar, the kind you could laugh at in front of friends without anyone asking harder questions. The true story required patience. I hadn't been willing to extend him at the moment. The idea that a quiet man refilling his water glass might be doing something far more difficult than sulking. I'd chosen a version that made me the fun one. At home, a week later, I found a folder in his desk drawer, a copy he'd kept for himself, dates and names in his neat, careful handwriting alongside the printouts. There was a sticky note on the inside cover I don't think he meant for me to see yet. Not so soon. 3 words, dated the night of the dinner, written probably in the car before he came in, and let a table full of people believe whatever they wanted to believe about him for 1 more hour. Tell her first. I never did ask him why he hadn't. I think I already knew. Some fears don't sound reasonable out loud until you've already been proven right. And he'd rather have looked paranoid to me for 1 evening than have said the wrong thing and warned Julian off before there was enough evidence to actually stop him. He'd absorbed my mockery like a man bracing for weather he knew was coming, because protecting Priya, protecting the truth, mattered more to him that night than protecting his own reputation at a dinner table. Rosa texted a month later to say the case had grown, 5 names now, across 4 states. 1 new report every few weeks, as the group Rosa had found kept comparing stories and dates. Priya sent flowers to Daniel with a card that just said, "Thank you for doing the math." Nobody else wanted to. I kept that card longer than I probably should have. Tucked it into the same drawer as the folder, a small museum of the night. I learned the difference between a man being difficult and a man being careful. We don't go to dinner parties the same way anymore. Not exactly. Not colder, just more honest. If Daniel goes quiet now, I ask instead of assume. Sometimes it's nothing. Sometimes he's just tired, or thinking about something unrelated entirely. The ordinary silences every marriage has room for. But sometimes it's this, a small, careful stillness while he works something out before he's ready to hand it to me. I've learned to sit in that stillness with him now. instead of filling it with a story that flatters me and shrinks him. The last time someone brought up that dinner, months later at Priya's, half joking, calling it the night Julian got outed, I didn't laugh along the way I used to. I said it was a night. I learned my husband would rather look small in front of a room full of people than say something he wasn't sure of yet. Daniel reached over and took my hand under the table, not performing anything, not needing the room to see it. Just there, quiet. The kind of quiet I finally understood wasn't jealousy at all. It was just him loving me the hard way, on time. If this story hit you, subscribe and turn on notifications, because next week's story will make you cry even harder. And drop a red heart below if you'd want a husband like Daniel.